Well, good afternoon and welcome to everyone to the 31st Virtual History of 2021, presented by the Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage. My name is Kathleen Lane and I'm the Executive Director of BAF and AIA Baltimore. We have a tremendous crowd today, and thank you so much for joining us. And special thanks to everyone who was able to make a donation for today's program. Your support allows us to offer these virtual histories every week. But before we get started, we just have a few announcements. On October 1st, we are kicking off Doors Open Baltimore with a special presentation by Dr. Lawrence Brown, the author of The Black Butterfly. Dr. Brown will look closely at the root causes of segregation in Baltimore and their lasting impact to communities today, as well as the roles of design, planning, and preservation in healing and restoring redlined Black neighborhoods. Doors Open Baltimore also includes numerous other in-person and virtual programs throughout October, and please see the full lineup on our website at doorsopenbaltimore.org. For today's program, we're very honored to have Louis S. Diggs presenting on the occasion of the International Underground Railroad Month, which is taking place this month. Mr. Diggs is an accomplished researcher of African American history. He specializes in Baltimore County, and he's the author of 13 books that he's written since his retirement from his 2 careers in the Army and with DC Public Schools. He has also led the effort to restore the Cherry Hill African American Union Methodist Protestant Church in Granite, Maryland, and convert it to the Diggs Johnson Museum of African American History. Mr. Diggs was honored by the state of Maryland for his contributions to preserving the history of Baltimore's Black communities. If you have any questions during the presentation, please be sure to add them into the Q&A box, and we'll have some time at the end of the program. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Diggs for the presentation. Oh, Mr. Diggs, please unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
I was
Thank you.
I'm still too old to be nervous. I've been doing this much too long. But I want you to bear in mind, though, that Baltimore County, even when it was much, much larger than it is today, they cut 5 counties out of Baltimore County. They never really documented anything about its African-American population. And therefore, a lot of information dealing with the Underground Railroad just never publicized. So what I'm going to start with is to show you this map of the historic African-American communities in Baltimore County. This did not happen until 1992, when these little enclaves, and there are many, many others, somehow the county decided to designate only 4 as historic, not in the true sense of the Secretary of Interior standards, but they all seem to like to have this designation. And these are the ones that I have been citing in on for 31 years. And those black spots indicate just what the enclave or community has been so designated. Next. Now, this is a map that shows where the slaves ran away from in Baltimore County. And I would like you to note that awful lot of them are on the, I think this is the south side of Baltimore County, and very few on the right side, east side. That's going back toward Baltimore. And that's what a lot of them went through, but not more so on the other side, where Hanover, Pennsylvania was the area that they were really, truly shooting to go. And one of the librarians, Julie Mathis, helped me to mark, we have a listing of what every home that had slaves in them. We know exactly where they are throughout all of Baltimore County. So we were able to identify where they, just exactly where they came from. And this was not only helpful to people like myself who was, really trying to make a notation where they are, but this also, not this at this time, but identifying where these safe houses were. Not safe houses, where the homes were that had slaves. This really helped slave catchers. By that I mean, Nathan, would you show the next one? When slaves ran away, the owners put articles in this area of Baltimore Sun. And early on, I collected just hundreds and hundreds of these articles. So the owner would really identify their slaves that helped to make it easy for a slave catcher and, indicate where they come from, Randallstown, exactly what they look like. So it really made it awful difficult for, for the slaves as they ran away. Now, next one, please. This gentleman named Nicholas Smith, he was the Underground Railroad conductor who operated in this part of Baltimore County. That is, especially at Rolling Road. That was one of I found the larger amount of runaway slaves used, well, it wasn't called Rolling Road during that time, it was Stumpy Lane. And this guy he was a cooper that had his shop on Dogwood Road, not too far from Rolling Road. And he would take his barrels north to sell. And he always hid a runaway slave in one of those barrels. He was really, really significant. As a matter of fact, I could not help but note that as I looked into his background, he even served in a Civil War to show his attitude toward slavery. He simply did not like slavery. And he's laid to rest in this area. I do bus tours sometimes, and I go by the area where he is laid to rest. It's just off of not Liberty Road, Dogwood. I just can't think of the name of the street, but it's extremely overgrown. It's right behind homes of African Americans, and it used to stand out quite prevalent. But here lately, I don't know, last time I went by, I really had to go look for it myself. It's just so overgrown. But he had from what I understand from a lady and gentleman that owns one of the safe houses in this area, the only real safe house that I really know of, the Supicks now owns it. And they used to tell these stories about how he would set the runaway slaves away, how they would get to the next safe house. And he would give them so many pieces of stone and told them to walk in a certain way. And every time they hit a certain point in their walk, they had to drop one of the stones. And when the stones were gone, believe it or not, they ended up right in front of the next point where there was a safe house. But would you show the next slide? And this is one of the most famous spots in our area where the runaway slaves could really find safe haven, and that's MRG Methodist Church. Now, if you notice, the church did not begin until 1855, not too in a distance of when the Civil War started. But when the Underground Railroad would slow down, or even better, if it stopped, they hid the slaves in the belfry, and the belfry, which has been cut off, was where where they were really, really safe. No one ever would, from what I understand and talk with some of the folk from the area, they always said they always checked downstairs, but never in the belfry. Now this is located on a corner of Rolling Road and Dogwood Road. If you really can't miss it. It's a very significant church. Of course, it was all white back then, and of course now, because the population has all changed, it's almost African American, and they have annual events celebrating what this church has done, for human beings. And you just have to imagine back during the slavery era, when I came out in Baltimore County in 1954, when I married a young lady from the Winters Lane area, Rolling Road was really, truly beautiful, not many houses around. Oh, it was just gorgeous. And when it got dark in the area, when I would come back from Fort Meade or from wherever I was born, you cannot help but notice how extremely dark it is. And if you can imagine a family with a baby or two trying to get through this extremely dark area, the baby was afraid that he would cry out, and they could easily be found. And that's why, from what I understand, from learning from the Supics, that's one of the reasons why they would have these stones rather than go by. There were not many objects that they could, safely sight in on. So this really played a significant part. And not only, and I'm not talking about slaves just from running away from our county, slaves coming up from the north. This was one of the main points when the slave was headed towards Hanover, Pennsylvania. So next slide, please. This is the safe house that I'm going to talk more about. This was owned by the Pierponts for many generations. The Pierponts had been, I guess, 1700s in Baltimore County. And when the last Pierpont retired, he did not want his home destroyed. And he kept it vacant for an awful long time. And the Supics, who fell in love with this beautiful old house, got in contact with Mr. Pierpont, and he took them as other people that wanted to buy his property, but they wanted to tear it down and build a nice home on it. And he said, not during my lifetime. I'll never get rid of our home that we've had for generations. Well, the Subics convinced Dr. Pierpont that they would never dream of tearing this gorgeous house down, that their goal in life would be to restore the house. And of course, that perked his ears right up. And of course, he knew the house had been standing so long that it probably would eventually fall down. So anyhow, they sold him their home. And they, in fact, lived in it. Did all they could to maintain the house to a point where it just got a little too much for them. As a matter of fact, the house, they had it fumigated, and the fumigation must have been a little hard on them because it caused the state to declare the house unsafe, and that no one could live in it. And the Subics for years have had problems from living in the house with all of the, the fumes and so forth. So they left it. It is on a nice piece of property, and the Subics were able to build a beautiful home in the rear of the house. And for the house itself, if you look on the left side where there was a slight addition to the house made, this is where the Pierpont had the entrance to the basement of the house. And when the runaway slave reached the house, they would open up this big cellar door, and there they would find food, candles, and things that they would need for the next trip, which they were again heading toward Hanover, Pennsylvania. And the house now has been designated historic. Matter of fact, I was serving at that time, while I was doing this kind of work. I served on the Landmark Preservation Commission, and I worked very hard to get the house designated historic so that it would not fall down, and it would be eligible for grants and things to keep it up. But somehow, as a matter of fact, when I had received a grant for another project that included some funding to help to save this house, I was not able to find a company who would indemnify me and my board, because if they got sick somewhere down the line, they would say they got it from the Pierpont house, and therefore we would be liable. So I had to go back to the legislature and indicate that the grant would run out before I could complete the project. And there was a few thousand left, and they just transferred it to the other project. So the Subics, so they offer wonderful classes of the Underground Railroads, mostly in this particular area. And when I have bus tours, I would take bus tours through there, so people, including myself, would gain more interest. So can we go to the next one? Next slide. This is the safe house as it is today. Our plan was to have, if nothing else, have the house redone all over with new boarding, and it would be made to look like a house, but it would not be a house. It would still be sealed in. And that's what our goal was, but we were unable to do that. And so this is where it stands today. You can't miss it. Going down Bowling Road when you get to Liberty Road. Next slide, please. And I had a bronze marker created as a compliment from the Baltimore County African American Cultural Festival to permanently mark the dairy house, which is not historic, not like the safe house is historic, but it just marks the occasion for us. This is very important to the history that African Americans, have had in the 350 years that Baltimore County has been in existence. It's extremely important to us. But it will not be saved like the safe house would be, because it lacks historic designation. Let's take a look at the next one. Now here's a picture of Miss Soupy, one of my bus tours that I've taken through to learn more about the history of the safe house. The safe house had put where they would go, the slave would go down into the basement. They created a brick with an image on it that appeared to me to be a peace-like emblem, of which they center around much of the history of this beautiful home. Next. And this is Linwood. Linwood is a true historian. He worked in Baltimore County in the planning department for many, many years. He has since retired, and unfortunately, he has been in an assisted living home for years now. And anyhow, this is part of the cemetery that's owned by the Nicholas Smith family. And this is a headstone of Nicholas Smith. Of course, I'm on the right side. And I'm in contact with the family, and I'm hoping that one day I can secure a grant to have that area cleared out, because there are many other markers in the same area. It's the Smith family cemetery, and his home and his cooker shop is not too far away from where the cemetery is. Next. Now, you will not believe this little building out on Putty Hill in Bel Air. That building is called Dowden's Chapel, and it's the tiniest building that you would ever dream of being a church, but it was in fact a church, and they hid runaway slaves that were more or less on their way to Baltimore, Maryland. It went through that phase, and I have found several other churches or lodges that also hid the slaves. But Dowden's Chapel is, I can't remember the total history, but it was built in the early 1800s on land given to them by, I think it was their former slaves and they had built this, given land so they could build a little church on. I have pictures of the inside, and it is just so tiny. Oh my goodness! But they open the church up once a year, and it's well maintained. But it was part of the Underground Railroad. How about the next image? I'm not sure what. This is a copy of the interior. Believe me, this picture is from wall to wall. If you put 5 chairs up there, you add 2 more chairs. That's as wide as the church is. But they keep it extremely well maintained. And I tour there, every time I take a tour out in that area, I would go by there. The people, they just love to share the stories of Dowden's Chapel. And so it was on the Underground Railroad. Next. And this one is, as you go up Old Philadelphia Road toward Harford County, you'll come across another area, historic area. It was called Bradshaw. Now it's called, I cannot think of the name of it, but it's all part of a larger city. African Americans have been here, deep into slavery. As a matter of fact, the church was not far from there. The church itself was built in 1844 when slavery was really heavy. And it was in this area where our good Governor Ridgely from Hampton Mansion had his other factory there, where I believe they were working on different things, where they had lots of slaves. And that's where some of these people came from, slavery. They had been part of the Hampton family. But this brothers and sisters lodge was early 1800s, and it consists of, I believe it was 3 such lodges. But when Harford County, which was part of Baltimore County, when it was cut into its own separate entity, they lost 2 of the other lodges. But from the interviews that I've conducted there, it was said that they also hid runaway slaves in that building. And the building itself was sitting on a piece of land that's just too close to the roadway. And the real owner of the whole property did move the lodge back off the road a bit. And it's being redecorated. It's not far from the only African-American church in the area, which is Asbury. But all of these things that we can find that are part of our history, I've made it one of my top priorities to try to get them designated historic so that they will never be lost. Because I have found in the 31 years that I've been going through all of Baltimore County, finding these little enclaves, the schools, just everything is just some of it sliding away from history. And if it took 350 years to find one person, and that's me, to start this process, it's terrible, but so be it. I have really done nothing but scratch the just a bit of the history, and I know there'll be more following me. Next slide. And this is Asbury. Well, I said 1844 to 1830. It's been there. It's so dedicated to the many people from that area, that part of Philadelphia, up in the White Marsh area. So it's still there, and I know that's been designated historic, but I don't think I've found anyone, but just a few people that mentioned slavery, but not an awful lot. But I felt that this being so close to the brothers and sisters lodge, that there must have been some interchangeable ways of saving runaway slaves. Next. And here, Julie DeMathis, a retired librarian, she was working with me, especially in the Catonsville area, where we were seeking homes in the Catonsville area that were in existence during the slavery era and were used as safe houses. And this one on South Boulevard Road, in Relay, we heard that, I believe the lady that lives there had either talked to Julie or myself and mentioned about a tunnel under her house. And of course, eventually Julie and I went to this house. And sure enough, when we went down in the basement, there is a tunnel that you can walk through, turn right, and go down to Relay. We didn't go that far, but we could clearly see that it was a tunnel that went quite a distance. So, oh boy, we knew we really found, a means of runaway slaves finding safety. But we eventually found in our research that home was a school, and a school for white kids. And why that tunnel was there, we never really found out. We never found out. So I only noted that because there are homes in that area that were in fact known safe houses. So we just wanted to bring this to your attention. Next. Picture of this, I can't understand. I would answer a question, but I can't really see it. But in any case, it was definitely a schoolhouse. Go to the next one. Okay, now this building, Union Bethel AME Church. This is another very, very old church, way back in 1826. Okay. There was this family, I have the names of the White family, that gave the land to the free African Americans who were living in the Randallstown area. They gave them land to build a church, and behind the church, a cemetery, 1826. And they were, in fact, hiding slaves. Again, if you notice the way my talk has been going, I'm headed toward not Randallstown. I'm headed for, my goodness, I forgot. This is Charles. in Pennsylvania. And my people come from right by there, Hanover, Pennsylvania. You can see where I'm headed in that direction. But this church, and I know it's true because when I did the history of Winters Lane, I was giving a talk up in West Virginia about the African Americans during the slavery era. And we found a rifle that one of the ancestors found in the top of that particular building. And that rifle was used during the I got myself a wee bit confused. Bear with me. Like I mentioned to Kathleen, and I'm be 90 years old in a few more months. And the mind is not holding too well on me. So let me go back on this Union Bethel Church. The church was called Little Log Church. It had been rebuilt, I think, 3 times to the church that exists there now. But the Union Bethel eventually moved into a much larger church up on Church Lane, where it's presently located. But this building still stands in that area. And also beside the building and the cemetery behind it, on the left side of it was a lodge that they were generous enough to have the school exist on the second level of the lodge, until the schools came into the county. That was a very well used, still is. Of course, the lodge is gone, but the cemetery and the church is still there. Next, please. Now, we're going into my family. My family comes from the Diggses and the Frys, and they come from off of 130, which goes through the Ricestown area, and it's very close. Within minutes, you're in Hanover, Pennsylvania. And our family was, I'll show you some images, but my family were extremely light, some of them. And my great-great-great-grandmother, who our records show that she was a slave to the Shriver estate, and she was blonde, blue eyes, and was given to the Thompson family in Westminster to raise. They did not want to rear her, and then she married a Fry, and then the whole family, my whole family came from this area. I was not born there. My father was born there, and that's why I felt a real strong obligation during my retirement to do research in his family. But of all the old records that I was fortunate enough to be to have interviewed several of the people that were just maybe two or three generations from when slavery ended. And of course, all of them are gone now, but I got so much good information from them. And they were hiding slaves in a small outhouse. And you would think, looking at their home, you would think that might be small house, but that was their home. And they felt that they should help out these human beings. And they, I guess the mother showed up whenever problem was, well, she was white. And the family was just afraid that if they got caught, they knew what would happen to them. But no, they never got caught. They owned a lot of property up there. Even today, my part of this family owns 52 acres of land in the same area where the house is. No one lives there, realize. But this young lady right here, who I interviewed, she also came from a mixed family that lived in Bowling Road. As a matter of fact, her home was right on the edge of the difference between the county and the city. They're on just up a little bit on Liberty Road. And she remembers when I interviewed her and her sister both of them are long gone, they'd be well over 100 years old. But they talked about it, how their parents talked about their mother and father, who talked much about the slavery era and how slaves would go through that part of Randallstown. There is a tunnel in the area that the parents always talked about, and they were so impressed. And they said they and other little children in the area would always go down to where these tunnels were and looking to see if there were any slaves still in these tunnels. I was just so moved about their little stories that I just had to include that in there, in this part of the Underground Railroad. Their home, which was just recently torn down, which is right in front of Northwest Hospital on is that Bowling Road? No, Old Court Road, where they building something else in there, but that's where their homes were. They had two homes there, these two sisters. But that was so cute. I had to just let people know how they thought about the Underground Railroad going through their community. Next. And this one is just when we went through the Catonsville area. I had talked with a gentleman who people said that this house on Rosewood Avenue was one of the safe houses. And he was just preparing to buy the house. And when we talked with him, he had gone through the house. And he said he had often wondered that there was this false attic in one of the upstairs bedrooms. He could not figure, why was it there? And he always thought that maybe it was a place that they had slaves, during the runaway slave. And he never really found out, to my, this is back in 2002, but this is just an indication of how people were concerned about gathering African-American history. And a lot of it I got from older people whose parents and grandparents were in fact slaves themselves, and they knew which homes were still hiding runaway slaves, because when they gained their freedom, they mostly stayed in the area and worked for the family that enslaved them. Next. I'm getting near the end, folks. These are the ones that Linwood Johnson and I had discovered were safe houses at this part of Baltimore County. And I had to say something about Fort Charles Hall. I mean, for almost a year, he he just found this cave and that's where he stayed. And in fact, he was able to get away to Canada. I just had to include that. Next. And this is a Piney Grove United Methodist Church. And this was the area where I never had any information about them being used as a safe house, but around this particular area of Piney Grove, where many blacks live. And this is the same area where my family still owned land in that area. But this was the center of everything, Piney Grove, up in Boring, Maryland. Next. And these are just some things I wanted to say about people, even before really got started. People would come to me and say things about the Underground Railroad, things what it was like during the slave era. And Cadenville was like a halfway point where they would either scoot off towards Baltimore or go the opposite way to Pennsylvania. And Mr. Kidwell, I'll never forget what he told me. He said when they were, when they heard the slaves were in the area, how it struck fear in the free people in that area, because slave catchers sometimes free African Americans and take them back into slavery. Next, and I'm really near the end. This is Mr. Arnold Ebb, and he also talked very strongly. He even knew there was a central house in the Winners Lane area, that when they knew that the slaves were coming up Stumpy Lane, they would ring bells and advise the people, free people, to get inside. Don't come out through the area. And I did, in fact, get a chance to interview him. It was his father. He was close to 100 years old when I ran into this stuff. And that was my church that I attended with him. So I was able to capture a lot of older African American people. Grace AME Church, where he attended, that was the focal point of the African American community. Next. And okay, this book I did not read. People referred to me many times that up in the Owens Mill area, that runaway slaves were very prevalent in that area. Again, heading toward Pennsylvania. As a matter of fact, when I met the I can't think of the lady's name from the Owens family, when I was on the Landmark Preservation Commission, she would also share lots of stories that she had heard from her family in generations about runaway slaves. Next, I believe we're pretty well near the end.
Looks like that was the last slide. Mr. Diggs, thank you so much for that presentation. You are a wealth of knowledge. We really, really appreciate your time. I think we could do many more of these, and we hope that we can actually. That's been the subject of quite a lot of comments in the chat is please do more of these. With 13 books, we could certainly do quite a few more, but even just with the number of Underground Railroad sites in Baltimore County. So if you might be willing to do a part 2, that would be great.
This would be part 3 because I did one before.
That's right. This is probably part 3. But Thank you. I think that many of the questions were actually answered by other participants. So we have a lot of very knowledgeable people here. And so I think most of all, we just want to thank you. I would encourage everyone attending to read your books, your 13 books, I think some of which are out of print. But are there any particular places you can direct people to find them? At the Diggs Johnson Museum?
Well, yes, we can. I do not put them in bookstores. I primarily wrote these books thinking that I would have children and I would be going to school sharing the history in this county. And I would give my books to the students because Baltimore County actually paid for them, but they allowed me to sell them because each book took me at least when I did turn the station, it took 2 years just to do the research down there. But people can always contact me, and they are in the library here in Baltimore County.
Yes, they're in the library in Baltimore County. I have one checked out now, Baltimore City too. So
yes, most of them are out there. But Kathleen, I am going to do my 14th book. I've decided that I would do one more book. I've been saying that for years. One more book. But there's such interest in the history that we really need to know our history. And so many Blacks came from this county. Just imagine how large it is with 5 counties being cut out of it. And of course, all of Baltimore City. So they didn't stop annexing property annexed from Baltimore County until 1919 during World War I. Mm-hmm. Blacks were living in the county, came home and found they were living in the city. So
yeah. Well, thank you for all you've contributed to this history and all this documentation.
My pleasure indeed.
And thank you again for your presentation today. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and please stay tuned for more programs, and take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a nice day, everyone.